is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California, the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. It is good to have you on set. Thank you for being here, Congressman. So, the facts as known, if true, mean what to you?
Here's what's really significant to me. That email purportedly says the Russian government is trying to help elect your father, and they have damaging information on Hillary Clinton. We know that that actually is true at this time because the Russians had already hacked the DNC. They already did have damaging information about Hillary Clinton, and we would learn later that they would use that in a deliberate effort to help Donald Trump get elected. So the contents of that email are quite accurate. This also, though, if it's true, puts the lie to the whole idea. We have no idea whether the Russians are trying to help us. We have no idea whether this came from the Russians. If that email is accurate, the description is accurate, it means that among the very first people, if not the first people of the public, who would learn that the Russians were trying to help elect Donald Trump were the Trump family itself. In
terms of priority, in terms of big deal factor, where is this development for you?
It's a very big deal. It's the first time publicly you see potential evidence that inner circle of the Trump family, of the Trump campaign, having direct contacts with the Russians, promising them damaging information about Hillary Clinton. And here they're talking apparently about a form of sanctions, the Magnitsky Act that places sanctions on individuals, Russian individuals, who violate human rights, something Putin hated and wanted to do away with. This meeting takes place in June. They want to get rid of this. We don't know what is said about the Trump campaign's willingness, if he's elected, to do away with this bill. But what we do know is the very next month, the Russians start dumping damaging information about Hillary Clinton. So did the Russians make a decision to do that directly through Guccifer 2 and DC leaks and indirectly through WikiLeaks rather than give it to Donald Jr.? Was that a decision the Russians made for whatever reason? There's a lot, obviously, we don't know about this meeting that we have to find out.
Congressman, in your estimation, two things. One, evidentiary. Will you have an ability to get this email, assuming it exists?
Absolutely. We need to bring in, I think, everyone who was present at that meeting, anyone who had a role in setting up that meeting. And this email must exist if the reporting is accurate. That means it must be in the possession of either the sender or the receiver or some other third party who received it.
And you intend to subpoena that kind of information?
We always try to get this information voluntarily, but when people say no, then we do issue subpoenas.
The solicitation on its face, forget about what came out of the meeting and whether it was good information or bad, whether this lawyer was legit or not. Accepting the offer of the meeting on behalf of Donald Jr., what does that mean to you?
Well, you know, the administration has tried to put this off by saying, well, this is really no big deal after all. In many campaigns, you get an offer of damaging information about your opponent. This isn't just any offer by any party. This is an offer by the Russian government to help interfere in an American election against one of the presidential candidates. That is not the same as getting a call from, you know, your friend in this state or that state who thinks they have found something or whatnot, or an op research firm. This is a hostile foreign power offering to intervene to help elect someone president of the United States. Hard to imagine something more serious than that.
Now, a big part of the defense is, but the lawyer had nothing. So we've been hearing about this lawyer, and she keeps getting tattooed by being called a Russian lawyer. There's nothing wrong with being a Russian ethnic. It's whether or not you're connected to the Kremlin and trying to do something nefarious. We heard from her the first time this morning. So here is an excerpt of this lawyer from Russia who met with Donald Jr. Here's what she has to say about that meeting.
I never knew who else would be attending the meeting. All I knew that Mr. Donald Trump Jr. was willing to meet with me. I could recognize the young gentleman who was only present in the meeting for probably the first 7 to 10 minutes, and then he stood up and left the room. It was Mr. Jared Kushner, and he never came back, by the way. And the other individual who was at the same meeting was always looking at his phone. He was reading something. He never took any active part in the conversation. That was Mr. Manafort.
They had the impression, it appears, that they were going to be told some information that you had about the DNC. How did they get that impression?
It's quite possible that maybe they were looking for such information. They wanted it so badly.
All right, well, so she puts people at the meeting, okay? She puts nothing on herself in terms of having any bad information or having any connection to the Kremlin. Is that helpful to you in any way?
Well, you know, it certainly corroborates that the meeting took place, and it took place among those parties, and of course in the context in which the Trump campaign denies any of these meetings ever happened, and then when they're forced to acknowledge they did happen, gives an explanation for the meeting that we find out is not accurate either. In this case, it was just about adoptions. It was not about the campaign. But of course, he invites the campaign manager, Paul Manafort, to be there. What I found really revealing even about the Trump organization's own self-serving explanations is they admit being disappointed in what they got at the meeting. They were hoping for more goods. Maybe this is why they went on their phones or left the meeting. They didn't get anything really good at the meeting, according to the Trump people. That would come later. That would come the following month in the form of all these dumped emails. But the fact that they went there in the hopes of getting damaging information, were willing to take it from a hostile power, that's pretty serious stuff.
Now, even if you cannot find any proof of wrongdoing on behalf of Donald Jr. or any of the people at this meeting or any of these 7 known campaign staffers or associates that you guys are looking at, the notion that the probe itself is a hoax because the Russian interference was either ineffective, or completely bogus. Doesn't this prove that they were doing something, the Russians, whether or not it was congratulated by the Trump staff, whether or not they helped in those efforts? The efforts themselves seem very real.
Well, it's certainly clear that if this report is accurate, that the Trump campaign was more than put on notice that the Russian government intended to try to help get Donald Trump elected president, and that they had damaging information. So when we learn the following month that, in fact, the Russians do have damaging information in the form of these stolen emails, and they do take action to try to help the Trump campaign, the Trump people are already aware of this email and this representation.
After the fact, you could give Donald Jr. and the members of this particular meeting plausible deniability, because at the time in June, we didn't know anything about Russian interference and meddling. They would learn about it after the fact. And when this meeting did bear no fruit, it is reasonable to argue that they would say, well, I don't know who this lady was, but she didn't have anything about Clinton anyway, so that when we learned about collusion later on, it does give some plausible defense to whether or not the Trump campaign was trying to motivate this negative Russian activity.
Well, we certainly don't know, for example, what representations were made in the meeting about the Trump willingness to do away with the Magnitsky Act.
Right.
Was this a for what the Russians would later do?
Don Jr. says that he brushed that aside and said, my father's not a public servant, he's a private citizen, you know, maybe if he wins, then you can talk to him then.
Well, of course, he also said it wasn't about the campaign, when in fact it was clearly the whole point was about the campaign and getting help from the Russians about the campaign. That's why the meeting was taken. So we can't rely on these evolving accounts by the Trump administration. We do need to get to the bottom of it. But I do think, again, for the president to dismiss this, to say this is a fake story, when apparently the family itself knew before just about anyone else, apart from the Russians, that the Russian government intended to help him during the campaign. And we later see that materialize in the form of these published stolen emails. I think it really demonstrates that just how serious this is, just how real this story is.
You going to call Don Jr., and would that happen soon?
We're going to want him to come into the committee. We're going to want, frankly, everyone who was in that meeting or anyone who had a role in setting it up to come before our committee.
Timetable?
I can't say. We are, at this point, still interviewing a lot of the lesser significant witnesses, and at the appropriate time, though, we're going to want them to come before the committee.
Congressman Adam Schiff, appreciate